While the UESC and Traxus fight a cold war for control of distant star systems, millions of humans carry on with their normal lives. While CyberAcme and Sekiguchi navigate the economic impact of megacorporations on a multi-planetary civilization, thousands of people labor away in subsurface mining operations on Mars. While the UESC developed the Marathon, Martians would look up in the sky to witness the theft of their moon. MIDA is a political organization originating on Mars. Its earliest documented history in the universe of Marathon stems from the organization's involvement with the failed Martian coup of 2466, but they were surely a result of a movement that started far earlier. So when asking why is MIDA so mad, we must understand the history of Mars and the people who live there. By 2145, Traxus would establish its headquarters on the big red planet of our solar system. We can assume through this that a human colony on Mars would have been established in the early 22nd century at the latest. This also reveals the possible power structure that would exist for this group of humans separated from their homeworld. Clearly, Traxus was a key element in their economy, and as we will learn later, pivotal to their safety. But is Traxus having this kind of control a positive for the everyday people of Mars? Well, in 100 years or so from the colony's founding, we'd see the negative consequences of Traxus's presence, as in 2206 the AI Traxus 4, assumedly a construct from the company who shares the same name, would go rampant. This would lead to the entirety of the planetary net being shut down, and the damage from this wouldn't be fully resolved for over 2 years. But the repercussions of this event would be felt through 2216. The Martians would have only a century of apparent peace before their next calamity. In 2310, the UESC would cease production of the cargo and resources in system transports, or, as they were commonly known, the Christ Soul Orbiters. Due to the natural environment being inhospitable, the Martians would rely on these massive vessels to transport the resources required to sustain the growing colony. They were seemingly entirely reliant on these shipments, and the news that the UESC would no longer develop these vessels would lead to a sentiment of contempt amongst the population. The UESC would eliminate the Christ development due to its high impact on the government's ability to conduct space operations. The history logs on board the Marathon would say this of the Christs. Of the 5 Christs that were built, 4 lasted around 100 years, and the other one only 73 before they needed to be brought back to Earth and refitted. Each refitting took about 15 years and completely occupied the Earth space shipbuilding facility for that time. The result was that no more than 5 Christs could be kept in service at any time. No Christ was ever built after 2310. This lack of resource vessels inevitably led to poverty, hunger, and death for the humans that called the Red Planet home. To top off the shit show that was the 24th century of Mars, in 2395, one of Mars's moons, Deimos, would be purchased for the yet-to-be-seen Marathon project, indicating in one final blow that nothing on Mars was sacred. Their moon could even be plucked out of the sky and sold in the futuristic hellscape that was the Martian economy. And that brings us to the 2400s and the rise of MIDA itself. Construction of the Marathon would begin in 2408, and rather than conditions for the population of Mars increasing as new resources, companies, projects, and individuals flocked to the planet for the new UESC Marathon project, the Martian citizens themselves would continue to starve as everything was funneled into orbit. Discontent would grow and grow while Martians lined up at food distribution centers to fight for scraps. This would peak in what would come to be known as the Mizraia Massacre. Quote, on January 6 of 2442, at the United Earth Government Mizraia Food Distribution Center, what had begun as a commonplace food riot turned into a massacre. The UEG riot troopers who arrived at the scene had been informed that the rioters were armed. As UEG troopers approached the scene in the Randall hover tank, plasma fire began spraying upwards. In a flash decision, the commander of the hover tank ordered his crew to open fire upon the crowd. It took only 5 seconds for over 500 starving Martians to be incinerated. The direct result of this was immediate hostility between the people of Mars and the UESC, and most likely the formation of MIDA. Now seems like a good time to explain the name MIDA itself, as I have been using it throughout. It appears to be an acronym, and it would be fair to assume that the M could stand for Mars, given its origins. But in truth, no one knows what MIDA really means, yet. Bungie themselves have played with this idea, as during the ARG, many possible meanings were provided for the acronym. Alas, no one has a straight answer, but given their writings and the possible acronym definitions we have a good idea of what they stand for. That same year, in 2442, we would see the start of the Third Martian War. The M5 combat shotgun would be deployed in operations and raids to decimate insurrectionist forces planetside. The war would conclude in 2445, with the more militant members of MIDA assumedly retreating into a guerrilla-style terrorist organization embedded within the Martian society, while the political realm would see their voice grow as a party in its own right. Historical data found on board the Marathon had this to say about MIDA's coup on Mars just a handful of years prior to the launch of the Marathon. MIDA, as it was known, was a popular political party until the failed coup of 2466, when their popularity suffered during their short rule. MIDA gained control of Mars for only 3 months, but their rule was ruthless and cruel. The MIDA death squads killed anyone who they suspected of being loyal to the UEG. Although accurate census data is not available for that period, it is estimated that about 10% of the population was killed. The MIDA coup was afterwards criticized for its short-sightedness, and an organization that was notorious for its long-ranging policies and politicking, the coup was very short-lived. MIDA never seriously accounted for the UEG's overwhelming superiority in ground forces and warships. In fact, they never attempted to take over the Marathon, which was nearing completion and would have made a very powerful weapon. The Marathon's massive size made it invulnerable to most normal space attacks, and it would have made a very stable weapons platform. After the failed coup, the leaders of MIDA were executed for their crimes, and the political organization was banned in all forms. The organization has survived as an underground terrorist organization and remains active to this day. In its underground state, it fosters terrorism throughout Seoul, and due to its spectacular funding and excellent personnel, it has grown to be one of the most feared terrorist groups active anywhere in Seoul. Now, this quote, failed coup does not appear to have truly been a failure for MIDA at all. Clearly, its well-funded presence in Seoul afterwards displays this, but this does not tell the whole story. There is a reason why MIDA did not take the Marathon or destroy it in such a way that it could not leave Mars's orbit, and it has to do with Traxus. MIDA didn't slink away after the coup. In reality, they cut a deal with the megacorporation Traxus. Traxus, which had the power of wealth as a result of hundreds of years of profitable business ventures, also had a good standing with the UESC, as they were now contractors working on the Marathon project. This intermediary between MIDA and the UESC now had an opportunity to solve an issue for both parties, a strategy that would garner favor for Traxus on both sides. Traxus offered a solution to the Christ fiasco to MIDA by providing them with the Traxus off-world solar orbiters. This would resolve the resource issue on Mars and hopefully lead to prosperity for Martians as a whole. They would also offer the leadership of MIDA a proverbial seat at the table, allowing them to speak on behalf of the Martians while avoiding the open conflict necessary for them to claim true power on Mars. The UESC obviously accepted these terms, as the benefits for them were phenomenal: an end to the on and off again war with Mars, an opportunity to complete the Marathon project without further complications, and a direct partner who now had some level of control over MIDA, now that Mars was reliant on Traxus for resources. Of course, some individuals would have to be punished, as the UESC did not want it to appear that MIDA was cleared of any wrongdoing, but this was largely a show to give the public appearance that the UESC had achieved a victory as opposed to a compromise. The Marathon would launch rather uneventfully, though there was one caveat. Secretly, 10 Mjolnir Mark IV cyborgs were placed on board. The reason for their inclusion on board? A mystery. Who placed them there? We cannot know for sure. What we do know is that Bernard Strauss, the Marathon's first science director, was aware that they were on board, while the president of the UESC was not. Could this have been some background dealings between MIDA and Traxus? Possibly. Could Strauss have been affiliated with MIDA to possess such knowledge? Possibly. But the truth is hidden thanks to the backstabbing politics of Seoul in this time period. So, time marched onward. Hundreds of years passed while the marathon drifted through space towards its destination, Tau Ceti. All the while, Mars' population grew and subsisted upon the newfound power structure brought forth in the 2400s. MIDA leadership, brought into the fold under the Traxus deal, assumedly became wealthy and successful community leaders, while the lower-level members retreated into hiding. Surely, the underground operations and intelligence networks remained passing information and attempting to subvert the authority of the UESC, but it appears that the newfound power structure was stable. Traxus continued to grow its operations on Mars, offering employment and sustainment of the off-world orbiters, while the UESC respected the situation enough to not cause an all-out war. But due to the lack of open structure and organization, the power of MIDA would come to rest primarily in the hands of those at the top, those who gained access to that seat at the table offered by Traxus. But even so, the movement never died. The desire for a prosperous, autonomous, and free Mars remained, rumbling in the grottos and housing quarters of the Martian people who lived under the thumb of megacorps and galaxy-spanning governments. This would come to a head when it became known that the UESC had lost contact with the marathon. On July 19, 2797, the UESC would publish an official letter stating that they would be launching a new mission to re-establish contact with the marathon and the lost colony. This letter made it clear that despite being separated by 12 light-years and 4 centuries, everything attached to the marathon mission should still be considered UESC property. This would lead to a growing sense of tension between the UESC and Traxus, who, based on the amount of work they contributed to the development of the marathon, now felt that they had a legitimate claim to the ship and the colony itself. MIDA, through their sophisticated intelligence network, is able to reason that the newfound tension between Traxus and the UESC will lead to further suffering for the common man. Humanity is controlled by mega-corporate structure, military-grade AIs, and galaxy-spanning governments. This is exactly what the rebels from the scab sands of Mars were fighting to prevent. And yet, 4 centuries later, the power of these adversaries had only grown. Young members of MIDA were able to come to this conclusion, and through further examination of their own history, they deduced that the former leaders of MIDA had to have colluded with their enemies to ensure their power, as opposed to truly fighting for their people or followers. The sentiment of the new generation of MIDA would grow further and further from the doings of old MIDA throughout the 2800s, before coming to a head in May of 2888. MIDA would publish their zine, titled Anti-Rev or Anti-Revolution, issue 4763C, and it would propel this modern iteration of MIDA into the stars, posing them as a legitimate force within the Tau Ceti star system. The zine is filled with coded language, ciphers, poetry, and generally stands to draw people to their cause. That being to operate as a force that lifts up the lives of the average man who suffer from the increasing control that companies like Traxus have over their lives. And unlike old MIDA, this MIDA is not willing to work alongside those they claim to be against. The zine also includes sections that reveal the intel MIDA has gathered about Traxus and the UESC's operations. It ultimately concludes with a call to action, a recruitment piece of sorts.
Heard the rumors, believed the lies. The marathon is out there. We talk in code, but code can't always translate, so gonna be clear. Pro go is a full go, city in play. Runners, prep your clones. There's gonna be a push. Are you ready?
MIDA was born from the red Martian sands, hardened through centuries of suffering, a cause that goes beyond the will or power of any one individual. They want equity. They believe that the power that comes with these technological advancements shouldn't be kept exclusively by the powers that be. The people deserve to prosper from these systems, and they simply cannot when they are controlled by the UESC and Traxus. So why is MIDA so mad? They stand at the precipice of a conflict with forces far greater in both size and resources. They must confront these foes in the deep reaches of space with guerrilla tactics and covert espionage. And what do they stand to lose? Everything. I think this would make anyone mad. Now, the question is, what are they going to do about it?